Hello, I'm Burt Lancaster. I'm standing in the fields at Kursk. The largest armored battle in history took place here in July of 1943. Hitler planned to annihilate the Soviet army at Kursk and make one final effort to win the war in the east. Here, thousands of tanks, both Soviet and German, clashed in a battle of monumental size. Kursk was one of the most significant single engagements of the 20th century.
In the spring of 1943, the Red Army readied itself for its summer campaign. In particular, it prepared for an offensive from its salient at Kursk. Humiliated by his defeat, Hitler hungered for revenge. He would bite off the Kursk salient at its base and annihilate the Russian armies within it. He called it Operation Citadel. On April 15th, 1943, Hitler called for a victory that would shine out like a signal beacon to the world. Reinforcements poured toward the east as if from an inexhaustible well, train after train. Double the number of tanks came off the assembly lines. There were new models, high-powered, heavier gunned, more thickly armored. Panther Mark 5s and Tiger Mark 4s, the best that Germany could produce. Wehrmacht began to mass. Hitler's Operation Citadel called for 20 divisions to the north of the salient, 28 to the south, and 7 at the salient's tip. 16 of them were armored divisions. Von Manstein, commander of the German Army Group South, had not been enthusiastic about Hitler's plans. He suspected that the Soviet strength might be too great to overcome. Himmler arrived to inspect the pride of the SS, 3 divisions of them. The Liebstandarte, das Reich, and the Totenkopf, the Death's Head, the purely Germanic SS. They were about to enter their last and fiercest battle. On the eve of the battle, Hitler announced, "Soldiers of the Reich, you are to take part in an offensive of such importance the whole future of the war may depend on its outcome. More than anything else, your victory will show the world that the resistance to the power of the German army is hopeless." The Soviet units had been briefed and rehearsed. All around their perimeter, they had sown mines to a density of 4,000 to every mile. Special tank destroyer squads were waiting for the panzers in foxholes in the middle of the minefields. The minefields themselves were designed to channel the German armor onto Russian anti-tank guns, massed in groups and firing broadsides at successive targets. Thousands of Russian guns were zeroed in. Over 900 Katyusha rocket launchers were loaded. The troops were confident. 2 of the field armies were veterans of Stalingrad. On the field of Kursk, as June ended, there were the makings of Armageddon. 2.25 million men. Over 6,000 tanks. 29,000 guns and mortars. All silent, waiting. During the night of July 4th, a Soviet patrol brought in a prisoner. He said that the German troops had been given a special issue of schnapps and rations for 5 days. H-hour was next morning. North of the salient, the 4th Panzer Army stood, the most powerful force ever put under a single command in the German army. 9 panzer divisions on a front of only 30 miles. If this enormous strength did not break the Soviets, nothing ever would. The possibility that it might not produced a strange fatalism in the waiting Nazis. Marshal Vatutin passed the word. It was a colossal battle of attrition. What mattered was not land, but the annihilation of men and machine. Whoever could hand out the most punishment would win. Even before dawn, the Nazis began to suffer. The artillery strike had caught them in their concentration areas. At 2 in the afternoon of July 5th, the Germans launched their first wave, some 2,000 tanks. Their firepower and mobility were even greater than during the early blitzkriegs. Greater still was the Soviet power. One Nazi crewman reported, "It seemed as if he were driving into a ring of flame." Many of the Nazi tanks foundered in the minefields in the first half mile. The Russian batteries picked them off in minutes. It was carnage of a kind not seen since the terrible battles of the First World War. Tank commander said, "We had been warned to expect resistance. Never have I received such an overwhelming impression of Russian strength and numbers as on that day." Few Porsche Tigers and Ferdinands broke through in isolated groups. The new Panther tanks were less successful. Everywhere they were hounded by the Soviet infantry. By the the end of the first ferocious day, the Germans had lost 25,000 men and 200 tanks on the northern edge of the salient. And they were still mired in the first line of Soviet defenses. The second line was stronger still. On the southern flank of the salient, where the 48th Panzer Corps and the 3 SS armored divisions were attacking, the fighting was even fiercer. The spearhead managed to dent the Russian line, the only action that was anything like a success. Under intense fire, the SS were forced to spend the night in the swamp. All through the second day, the Germans struggled to exploit their modest success in the south. 2 of the SS divisions clawed their way forward nearly 4 miles. The battle raged for a week. The Nazis poured in reinforcements. By the night of July 11th, they had driven a bulge 15 miles wide and 9 miles deep into Vatutin's front. The Germans scraped together every tank that would run, some 600 of them, and began their last drive. The main Russian battle tank, the T-34, faced heavier equipment, Tigers and Panthers. But while the German tanks outgunned the Russians, they were slower, and the Panthers could be set afire with ease through their lighter engine armor. The T-34s were faster, more maneuverable, and more numerous. Through the hot morning of July 12th, the 2 armies closed for the most terrible armored encounter of all time. A brutal slugging match in clouds of stifling dust and oily smoke. Just before noon, they met head-on. By nightfall, it was over. More than half of the German tanks had been annihilated. The rest were in full retreat. Stalingrad had been a psychological victory. Kursk was an undeniable triumph of Soviet arms and generalship. It had been, as Marshal Konev put it, the swan song of the German armored force.